Hi, everybody. How are we all today? Welcome back to Normal Island Live. I am Sneakret, and I'm happy to be hosting you for tonight's show. As always, we want to hear your thoughts on the issues that matter to you. Drop them in the chat. I know some people have already. Great to see it. And if we do miss anything, let us know what you'd like to see in the next show on Friday by messaging us over at Turn Left Media. We're also now on Blue Sky. I think we're at something like 2.6 thousand followers over there, which is fantastic. So do follow along or drop us a message anywhere that you can. Now, tonight, we're going to be covering the latest on a very, very important piece that I've seen recently around people's preferences in sandwiches. We're going to be covering the ongoing energy bills crisis and how it links into some of the conversations we've heard around kind of liberal individualism recently and Labour's climate commitments. We're also going to be having a look at what is going on with the farmers. And we're going to be talking about how the mainstream media's new narratives seem to be encouraging the left to throw just anything and everyone under the bus. Plus, we'll be joined by the wonderful activist, commentator, friend of the show, Femi. Hello, Femi.
Hey, Sneaker, how you doing?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. I'm freezing, but we'll get to the energy bills bit in a second. But yeah,
Fantastic. Now, I do want to say, I know Femi has had different takes in different aspects over the last few years, and I know there are some fans of the channel who still feel a little bit sore, honestly, about previous events. But I just want to say, from my perspective, Femi is someone who has always, on a intersectional level and in terms of kind of solidarity with other people, has always stood out as someone who is not willing to compromise any of the marginalized groups that we're supposed to support on the left. Anybody who is currently under the thumb of a really horrible government that we're dealing with. And I'm very, very grateful to have you along. And I actually think when we talk about unifying the left, it's a really good opportunity when we're able to speak to people like yourself and not just keep platforming people who call themselves leftists and then throw trans people under the bus the day before Trans Day of Remembrance. For example, hypothetically, I would say. So I do want to say that for anybody in the chat, I know there's a lot of people in the chat who are very happy to see you, and I would appreciate everybody giving Femi a very, very warm welcome.
hey.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Honestly, any issues you got with me, just say so. We're all friends here.
But don't let me catch any of you giving him any shit, okay? Thank you very much, Femi. We will jump into the stories in just a second. Thank you for joining us. Just before we begin, let's take a deep breath. Let's go into the headlines for today. So, we are going to be covering front and center tonight the week in woke. Does the latest sandwich survey show a society in crisis? No, but we will be covering it. Energy bills crisis as well. We'll be talking about how the price cap has risen again, and Starmer has been making a lot of commitments at COP29, but we'll kind of be digging into that a little bit and taking a look at some of the forces behind Labour's big climate commitments. Farmers Gone Wild, of course. We'll be talking about Jeremy Clarkson, Farage, and the millionaire landowners that are parodying working people with a campaign against the government's inheritance tax reforms. And on the agenda, as legacy media seems to be setting out a new plan of attack post-Trump, we want to take a proper look at some of the narratives that are being pushed forward and why certain self-proclaimed leftists are falling in line with it. Before we dive into the main stories, I just want to thank you all for joining us today and give a very special shout out to our channel members and patrons. As most of you will know, this channel is run on a voluntary basis, but our goal is to build Turn Left into a genuine left-wing alternative to mainstream media. We're very passionate about the stories that we do cover. We're very passionate about the voices that we bring into this. If you would like to help us on this journey, you can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 a month. You can also make a one-off donation at Ko-fi. I always get that one wrong. Or you can just keep watching, sharing, and engaging with our content. Everything helps. So thank you very much again. Now, topic one. I did want to put this first. I think it's something that we all feel very strongly about. I'm sure all of you have been closely following along with the findings of the latest UK sandwich survey, and you'd be right to. In what is fast becoming one of the greatest rifts of our time, some have said, the Daily Mail recently reported that Gen Z is waging war on sandwiches, opting for trendier and more varied fillings. leaving the traditional choices in the dust. Now, just a quick warning before I do share this, some of these findings may be disturbing. The report found that only 1 in 100 Gen Zers would consider using traditional English mustard in their ham sandwiches, which is horrifying because obviously English mustard doesn't even taste a bit like poison. On top of this, Gen Z are also betraying our nation by choosing continental cheeses almost half of the time rather than our own homegrown local British owned cheddar. I'm sorry. It's hard to keep it together when I think about people turning their backs, particularly on cheddar. So just give me a second. Sorry. Obviously, this is a major issue, and in a completely earnest attempt to contribute to the nation's conversation, and not a really desperate attempt to gain some views in the search results. The report has even prompted a number of extremely valuable think pieces from our media, like this wonderful bit of thought leadership from The Independent. Now, Femi, I know some of our followers might suggest that this is just some sort of soulless grab for attention at worst and the beginnings of yet another unnecessary generation war being stirred up at best. But do you think there's something deeper behind the way these stories are being framed?
No.
Okay. Thanks. On to the next topic. Thanks.
Well, I genuinely do sometimes wonder whether or not it is deliberate because, like, how do outlets like the Daily Mail ever redeem themselves within the eyes of the public after everything they've done? Like, the advantage we have in the UK is that we've seen a lot of the far right agenda play out, and it has ended up hurting working class people, the same people that the far right rags claim to be the champions of. And so, how do they win back the public, given that Gen Z want nothing to do with that kind of narrative? And I think that they have to try and act like the whole thing was always a joke, like they were always just a parody of themselves. And they just do more and more ridiculous stuff that nobody could ever take seriously. So that in the end, no, we were on your side from the beginning. We're just making fun of all those boomers. We were with you, Gen Z. That has to be the reason.
Trying to just put themselves in, like, they're trying to make themselves like, oh, we're just funny guys, we just do all these funny kinds of
Mm.
headlines, and they're trying to pull themselves away from, the one about the gay gene being discovered, as an abortion hope or whatever. They're trying to kind of pull themselves back into it. I do think it was really funny though that the Independent did a follow-up just as a little attempt to jump on the search results. Like, someone actually did sit down and do a full extra article, to add to the noise. But
Mm.
yeah, it's depressing, and it also always makes me feel nervous when you've got whenever these sorts of stupid headlines come up. It does make me think, like, what kind of horrible thing is happening?
Mm.
What new horrible thing is happening, that means that they're giving us this instead? But yeah, I tell you what, we'll jump in to the next topic because I mean, it's not as high a priority, obviously, but now that we've covered that, I guess we can start talking about the cost of living crisis. Now, we can look at, I know it's a little bit more trivial, but I do think that we should talk about energy bills. The BBC reported today that a rise in energy bills has pushed UK inflation to its highest rate for 6 months. The inflation rate, which measures price changes over time, rose by more than expected to 2.3% in the year to October, up from 1.7% in September. Annual gas and electricity prices, for a typical household went up by around £149 last month, although prices are rising more slowly than recent years. Now, in the article from the BBC, Derek Licorice, non executive chairman of energy supplier Utilita, said that he had seen a 60% increase over summer in customers asking the company for help with bills. He said, now that it's really cold, the figure is going to be even higher, adding that people were running on empty after being hit with rising costs throughout the pandemic and the energy crisis. If only the suppliers could do something about this. But the thing is, guys, they're barely getting by themselves. According to the latest available public info, poor Utilita only made pre-tax profits of 31.2 million in the last financial year. So there's only so much they can do. Thanks, Derek. Now, the part that I do find interesting when publications like the BBC cover the cost of living, energy bills, etc., is that we never really tend to get into the actual cause of these issues. Energy prices going up is due to the energy crisis. The cost of living is going up due to food prices increasing. But they're never very keen to talk about why that might actually be. And I think once you notice this, it becomes really apparent, especially when you're talking prices are going up because the price of energy is just too much. For example, we know that our energy price cap system in the UK charges us at the cost of the most expensive source of energy that we turn on over the course of the day. So even if 60% of our energy mix comes from renewable energy, comes from wind, solar, anything else, if we have to use fossil fuels at any stage in the day, the cost suddenly shoots up to the price of oil. But that's not what people see. What we see is a government talking about investing heavily in renewable energy and making really big commitments at COP29 and talking about what's going to be best for the planet and our future. And then we also see our energy prices continuing to rise. And because publications like the BBC don't give us anything beyond a shrug and, well, that's the energy prices, we believe that this means that all of this talk of renewable energy isn't actually going to help anything. We see wind farms going up, but we don't see our prices coming down. But if this is the case, why wouldn't the likes of Keir Starmer be stepping out to encourage people to learn more about these costs or learn more about these climate commitments or how it all fits in together? Probably because it's a lot easier to just vaguely refer to how all of this is very good for the planet and good for us and ignore the rest of it than it is to actually make room for any discussions of how the government could be helping people right now. There's a campaign called Warm This Winter where they have 4 specific demands that the government could take on immediately that could help people living in fuel poverty and that could also help people's homes help people keep their homes warm. Um, for example, the UK's housing stock is some of the worst insulated in Europe. There are huge amounts of kind of initiatives and projects that we could be taking on that could help people right now. And I think that information is over at warmthiswinter.org.uk. But much like the way that posturing on asylum seekers and small votes and doing all these announcements about investments in border security stops us from asking the simple question of why not open up a safe route, this kind of deplatforming and vagary in these conversations prevents us from looking further into how valid these commitments actually are. It's easier, basically, to virtue signal without adding any further substance because it stops the public from asking why the government's recent £22 billion pledge towards carbon capture came following a surge in lobbying from fossil fuel companies right before they announced it. According to Open Democracy, as part of their Dark Money series, they reported that earlier this month, the government unveiled a sizable commitment to carbon capture, utilization, and storage, announcing that it would spend 22 billion over 25 years on 2 carbon storage clusters, which it said would entice a further £8 billion in private investment. The investment was confirmed 2 weeks later when the government revealed it had reached a commercial agreement with investors that included Eni, BP, and Equinor to unlock that £8 billion of private investment. Now, why is this an issue? Well, because CCUS is controversial. It is largely untested at scale, and critics say that it's basically a sop for the fossil fuel industry, which means kicking the can down the road on the seismic shift in energy policy that's needed to genuinely meet net zero targets. As the reporter wrote, the announcement will do very little to quell the concerns of people, given that the 3 main investors are among the largest oil and gas companies in the world. Essentially, we're once again seeing a Liberal government claiming to be invested in improving our lives, jumping on these moral values, talking about a cleaner energy system and the benefits it could bring for the planet, whilst simultaneously ignoring anything that could actually tangibly support people right now, like housing insulation or subsidies. But it's not even just that, because beyond just passively not trying to improve our circumstances, they're in fact collaborating with lobbies and companies that are literally working directly to maintain our need for fossil gas. The same companies that are charging us through the roof in the first place. I know this is a little bit of a rant from me, and to be clear, I am very much in favour of renewable energy initiatives and the energy transition, but I'm just getting frustrated with the Labour Party and powers that be that are weaponising the rhetoric of actual causes and things that people really care about, whilst undermining them with financial investments and a total lack of substance. Femi, I don't know. Am I being too harsh? What do you think in terms of Labour's renewable energy commitments? Is it enough?
No, honestly, I know that when activists come onto a platform and then praise each other, it sounds a bit circle jerky. But that was a better explanation of anything to do with energy bills than I've seen in a very long time on the mainstream news. So thank you for that. I've come here to learn. Thank you. Yeah. So the lack of focus on insulation, the failure to do anything close to what France is doing in terms of capping energy prices properly for people. It shows that the priorities are not in the right place. So I fundamentally agree with everything you just said.
Well, great. No, I think you've been, since the election, been pretty critical of a lot of what the Labour government has done. I think for me, the thing that is so frustrating is it all plays into this same conversation about people complaining about identity politics and saying like, well, it's not doing anything to actually help real people. And the thing is, all of the language that we're seeing from the government should be accompanied by demonstrating how these morals and these values that they're putting out there actually can help people. But they don't want to. Like they want to be able to use all of the grandstanding and Keir Starmer going to COP29 and saying we're going to be 80% renewable by 2030. But then, yeah, I mean, fossil fuel companies do have this very, very sneaky way of knowing that they're in a dying industry, but just finding the very last chances to just pull as much as they can out of their existing businesses. And it just, yeah, I mean, especially with the removal of winter fuel payments and everything else in between, it just feels like we're going to end up with another system in which people are frustrated and they feel like they're not seeing any actual benefit, and it's going to put people off renewable energy investments in the future.
Well, yeah. So in terms of everything to do with energy and the fight against climate change and lowering energy bills, the thing that's never really just properly discussed and the thing that's missing from all those conversations is you have the right saying anything to do with net zero, anything to do with that is going to hurt your energy bills because they're all focused on green net zero and they're not caring about you working class people. You're going to pay more for it at the
Hmm.
pump, etc. The whole point of anybody who's in charge of this should be about saying yes, the energy transition is going to cost money. That cost will be paid by the people that can actually afford it. You will not
Hmm.
be pay, you will not be paying a penny more because our priority is getting you working class people lower energy bills. That will be
Hmm.
through insulation. That will be by for example, I don't. This is just me off the top of the dome, but like I don't understand why we focus more on fuel tax than we do on road tax,
Mm.
i.e., have the more expensive cars pay more in tax rather than charging the same tax on fuel, which hits everybody. Like,
Yeah.
surely that's the obvious way we should be trying to do this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's the other thing. The other thing with it is like, so there's now a lot of onshore proposals as well for renewable energy now, and this is especially interesting from my side. But there's a lot of the frustration that people will have is things like, okay, well, we're going to have onshore wind in our backyard, and then you've got the NIMBYs to deal with, but the NIMBYs will also come back and say like, well, I've got a wind farm next to my house, and it hasn't made my bills any cheaper, and it's like,
Mm.
well, no, because that's not how it works. The energy will all go into the grid and then it goes out across the board. And then that's how the price cap works and blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't mean that these renewable energy sites and the companies that are investing in them can't make people's bills cheaper. So a lot of the things that they will do is, for example, if there is excess energy, they can do deals with local businesses where they'll actually give them direct access to the energy that they're producing. You can also use investments, like a lot of these farms and wind and solar farms will make like a large local community investment as part of the project. That can be used to help people get set up with either heat pumps or solar panels or anything that can make people's lives tangibly cheaper. And it just feels really frustrating that you've got Keir Starmer wandering around at COP29 talking about all these big initiatives and also seemingly having no actual interest in helping people feel even a little bit hopeful about some of the benefits that it could bring. I don't know. It just, yeah, it feels like, again, that sort of, he's told us that everything's going to get worse before it gets better, and he seems just so desperate to avoid giving us any kind of optimism.
Yeah, and that's kind of the problem with the whole narrative they did. Like because they have been so desperate to avoid sounding too progressive, they end up undermining their own causes. Because
Yeah.
the whole point of being in power as somebody supposedly off the left is to prove to the public that progressive policies will actually improve their quality of life. Even if
Mm.
you do the right things, but have the narrative of the right, you then basically you're constantly telling people we're doing this left wing thing, but your life would be much better if we do the right wing thing.
Yeah.
You're undermining yourself at every step.
Yeah. I think it was Davey me on Sunday in the debrief who mentioned it's like this thing of, you've got these binaries of like 0 and 1 is the right wing, and it feels like Keir Starmer is trying to play 0.5. It's
Mm.
like, well, why would anyone support that? You're basically just admitting that their thing makes sense, but you're not going to do it as much.
Yes, yeah. Well,
It's
we'll get onto the concept of the left aping the right in order to supposedly succeed in the next segment.
We will.
But yeah, yeah.
Thank you for keeping me on track. Um, yeah, I think it's a really really interesting area. I do want to ask people to keep an eye out on this when you do see the way that people report on things like energy bills going up, because it does lead to this misconception where people think that renewable energy is making things more expensive, and it's actually really, and because it's confusing and it is hard to figure out. There's a whole load of different charts about how the bloody energy price cap works to try that I could just about get my puny little brain around trying to figure it out, but it's when you look at the BBC, they just say like energy prices are going up because of the energy crisis. And you're like, oh, it's the crisis. Well, that's the crisis then.
Given that, based on this conversation alone, you know significantly more about the energy prices and energy bills and basically climate than I do. My question would be: the argument is constantly renewables versus fossil fuels, with nuclear somewhere in the middle.
Mm.
And they always say, "Well, what happens if the wind stops blowing? Aren't you going to rely on nuclear?" What is the bad side of nuclear? Why isn't the left, progressive left in general, saying yes, we'll go renewables, but we'll have nuclear as a backup when it's not?
So there's different aspects of it. I think a lot of the nuclear side nowadays is still essentially still fear of the issues of the past. So nuclear now is considered to be extremely extremely safe, but
Mm,
the risk, if a wind turbine breaks, there's a wind turbine that's broken. Unless someone's like directly standing under the wind turbine, there's not going to be
mm,
any kind of major issue. On the nuclear side, it is largely, to me, a continuing PR issue, and especially given that we're still trying to figure out ways to store nuclear waste
mm.
from the past. I think we're drilling a massive hole in the North Sea or something like that now. That's the next step of the plan. I might be
Okay.
wrong, so please do fact check me, guys, if I'm just making it up. But yeah, as Double D has said in the chat, actually, nuclear is getting a lot cleaner. Thorium reactors are getting much less hazardous. But it's basically the fear that when it has gone wrong before, it's gone like
Badly
really
wrong.
wrong. Yeah, very, very
Yeah.
badly wrong.
Yeah.
But it's a big part of the energy mix. And when you look at things like wind and solar, it's free. Like I think it's Spain has like Spain and France both had excess energy this year because of how much they have, how much they use renewable energy for. And the UK
Mm.
is really bloody good for wind, as we
Hmm.
know. Devastatingly, we're extremely good for wind. Solar panels, I don't know. I think I looked at my own house and it was something like it'd take 20 years for me to get any money back on it based on where I live and how cloudy it is.
Yeah. And also,
um,
you need a roof for that.
yeah, you need a roof. It's difficult if you're in a flat and you've got like a little thing
Mm.
out the window.
Yeah.
Before we go on, I just want to say thank you so much to Scottish Soul for gifting the memberships there. I think we've got 5 gifted memberships picked up by HK, Martin, Dottie, John, and the
The final
final
melt
meow.
from Meow Town. Meow
Meow.
Town. Meow
Nice.
Down. Okay.
Thank you very much, Scottish Soul. Um, but yes, okay. Let's thank you very much, Femi. Let's jump in to our next topic, which I do think you're a little bit keener on. Now, I do want to say we're going to come to the chat as we discuss this one because this is going to be a slightly larger area of coverage. I'm assuming based on what I imagine to be a substantial input from Femi. So if you have any questions for Femi, any questions for me, anything you'd like to add, just drop it in as we go, and we will come through. Okay, Farmers Gone Wild. Woo! Cog and Curtis ran through this latest escapade earlier in the week, but just to bring everyone very quickly up to speed, Labour's budget included a change to inheritance tax rules for farmers that will limit their inheritance tax-free threshold to 1 million. That means the first million is still going to be free. This change is not expected to affect the majority of farmers because the majority of farmers are not that rich. In fact, the official data shows that fewer than 500 farms per year are expected to pay more inheritance tax as a result of the changes from 2026. This has not stopped the very rich farmers from being very upset about this. They've been protesting in London outside Whitehall, and they've been accompanied by the likes of people's heroes, Jeremy Clarkson and Nigel Farage. But this couldn't possibly be disingenuous, could it? Well, as Josiah Mortimer reported for the Byline Times recently, it might be. After all, in a 2021 interview with the Times, the Conservative voting controversialist said avoiding inheritance tax was the critical thing in his decision to buy his then £4 million plus farm. Um, it does feel a little bit disingenuous. Now, Femi, I want to bring you in. I know you've been following this closely, and Cog actually gave you a shout out in the last show as the ghost of Brexit past, as a reminder. Um, how are you finding it? How are you finding it watching this play out?
So it's one of those issues where I'm not taking a firm position because I'm hearing very, very conflicting things. Like you've got the Treasury saying that this will only affect 500 people because 500 claims, because there are only 500 claims in last year, people that would otherwise have paid inheritance tax, and therefore those are the people who will be affected by this now. But National Farmers Union are saying that it could affect up to 70,000 farms. So that is a massive difference. And the arguments I'm hearing a lot is along the lines of, well, yes, it'll be 1 million for one spouse, 1 million for the other spouse, and then 1 million for the house and the actual home, and then the land on top of that. Um, so yeah, so there's a lot of debate as to as to how many people will actually be caught by this. And if it does include a lot more people, then you're not really targeting your Jeremy Clarksons, you're targeting your everyday farmers. And for me, and this is the argument that I've been having, I don't really care to a large extent about whether or not somebody who has been gifted £3 million equivalent by a parent gets to keep all of it. My main issue is if they don't get to keep all of it, if they have to sell some of it off in order to pay the tax, pay HMRC,
Mm-hmm.
that could end up meaning that that land then goes to a corporation or a landowner that doesn't plan to use it to farm, and
Mm-hmm.
that could compromise our food security. So it's
Yeah.
not so much about protecting farmers for me as it is about protecting our food industry. Like the whole reason why you have the inheritance tax relief for farmers specifically is because a lot of farms operate at a loss, and so they require subsidies in order to function. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you end up charging them an inheritance tax, which wipes out those subsidies, you'll have a lot of farmers essentially going bust. So
Right.
that's the issue.
Mm-hmm. And how have you kind of been reconciling this? I think you were did you say you were speaking on it earlier today as well?
Yeah, I had a BBC debate on this earlier today, and so I said essentially, I don't care about the direct effect on farm ownership because for me the issue is in the cost of living crisis. All that really matters to me is how it affects cost of living crisis, i.e., our food supply. Is it going to
Yeah.
make food more expensive? Is that going to happen? Now, the thing that really annoys me, as you can imagine, is that the people who have been championing farmers on this issue are the worst people for this issue. Like you've got Jeremy
I'd go a
Clarkson.
step further. I'd say the worst people.
Yes, yeah. Like Jeremy Clarkson is an actual piece of shit. If you remember what he said about Meghan Markle, saying that he wanted her to be paraded through the streets naked with tomatoes thrown at her, shouting "shame, shame, shame." What a guy! And now he has
Rat rat bastard.
yeah,
Sorry.
and then no, it's accurate. um, and now he, having admitted that the reason why he bought that land was to avoid paying inheritance tax, he said that at least this way the government doesn't get the money when I die. He is precisely the sort of person that inheritance tax should be targeted towards.
Yeah.
Um, so he's the reason, he's like the worst spokesperson you can imagine to argue against this. And then you've got people like Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage said that if we left the EU, it would mean that we'd have increase our farm production here in the UK.
Great British farms. Blah blah blah
E-
blah.
exactly. Boris Johnson said that we'd increase the subsidies and the payments for farmers, that it would avoid paperwork, avoid red tape. And now, as you may have seen in the most recent video, I've interviewed farmers that said that Brexit has created tons more red tape for them. So the
Yeah.
people who have already been on record as spending the last 8 years screwing the farming industry are now supposedly its greatest champions. So
No.
that for me is insane.
No. I mean it. Yeah. Don't forget also James Dyson.
Mm,
is apparently very upset about the budget and the inheritance tax reforms. I think he called it spiteful in the Times. Um,
mm.
James Dyson is one of the Brexit billionaires who also owns over 35,000 acres of land, farmland. And again, he thinks it's very unfair.
Yeah, given that right now, according to Farmers Weekly, they did a survey. 69% of farmers believe that Brexit has either fairly or very much negatively affected their farms.
Yeah.
The National Farmers Union has said that Brexit has created a crisis in UK farming. The Food and Drink Association said Brexit, by just in the first few months, wiped 2 billion off the UK food industry.
Hmm.
So, for the idea that the people who supported Brexit um, can have a word on what's good for the farming industry is insane to me.
No, and yeah, and it's also, I mean, there's the other side of this as well. Like, I think one of the things that's interesting with this is the pitching it of like what like Nigel Farage put wellies on to go and protest to be like, look at me, I'm a working farmer, and like they're trying to play on this like old school image of like the farmer going around with his flat cap and like milking the
Mm-hmm.
cows himself, and like we're talking about farmers who have more than a million, who are getting like who have huge amounts of assets, and we're also talking about farmers who are pretty have a pretty tough reputation in terms of like exploiting a lot of their workers, especially when it comes like migrant workers, pre-Brexit as well. A lot of There's not a lot of regulation on farm workers to the point where a lot of people who've come to the UK to work on these farms have been heavily exploited, and they're basically at the behest of these employers who are famously not treating them particularly well. So it's very, very uncomfortable to have this sort of like cosplay situation
Mm-hmm.
where they're
Yep.
going around like bringing the tractors into town. It's probably the first time that guy's been on a tractor in years. I don't know. It's so farcical to see this kind of playing out with this kind of imagery.
And I've also got a couple of issues with Farage, for example. There has like I don't like using the word stupid in politics. I try to avoid it at all, well, not at all
Me
costs.
neither.
Um,
I would
but
never.
if 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 you followed Nigel Farage um, on farming when it came to Brexit, if you followed him on fishermen, especially on fishing when it came to Brexit, like you've seen what he did to the fishing industry. You've seen him on record as saying that Brexit would give the farming and would give UK fishing £2 billion, and instead its cost, according to the National Federation of Fishermen's Associations, £300 million.
Mm.
Like you've seen him decimate a UK industry, and you think he should be the leader of yours. If it is stupidity.
But do you think But did he dress as a fisherman?
He actually did.
Oh,
He,
did he? Oh, shit. Of course he fucking did.
he got on a boat. He got on a boat. He caught some fish. There's a big photo of him holding a fish. It was
Oh god. Well, then there's no excuse. There's no excuse to trust him this time. I thought maybe that might have been what swung it.
mm,
No, it's infuriating.
I also like, and I try not to say this too often because I know that we should try and find some. We shouldn't be rubbing people's mistakes in their faces, but given that farming has been screwed by Brexit, given that 54% of farmers did vote
Hmm.
for Brexit, like I don't I try not to I don't hate people who vote for Brexit. I don't. It's just what you did afterwards. When you
Yeah.
saw the wheels fall off in the 3 years that followed, while Boris Johnson was just everything was going to hell, and in the years since where Brexit has been damaging,
Hmm.
if these farmers had come out and protested loudly whilst everybody else was,
Yeah.
we wouldn't not only wouldn't we would we not have had the direct damage to farming, we
Hmm.
also wouldn't have done so much damage to the economy that, according to the official figures, has wiped 40 billion off UK tax revenue.
Hmm.
The government probably wouldn't be going so far in order to claw back taxes in the first place.
Yeah. I. Hmm. But do you think actually, in terms of those demographics of the farmers that did vote Brexit, do you think it's the same farmers that aren't in this bracket? Because I don't know. Like, I know there was a split. You'll know if only someone who I was talking to would know something about Brexit demographics and voting. Hey, Femi, do you know if there was like a difference in household income between farmers that voted for and against.
I was tempted to look that up today. I just didn't get around to it.
Oh God.
But yeah, sorry. But generally speaking, it will be the older you are, the more likely you are to vote leave, and I would imagine also that the more landed gentry farmers would be
Mm.
also more likely to vote leave. So they're the ones most likely to be affected by policies like this.
Oh, good then.
Mm.
Ha. Welcome. Um, I would rub it in people's faces sometimes, but it's not fun, really, is it? Because you go, oh, "I told you so. I told you this was going to be absolutely shit, and we'd be in the shit," and then you're just also standing in the shit. Like, well,
Yeah, yeah.
look what you've done. Well
Uh,
done for all of us. Um,
Edward Sexby says it's not about Brexit, it's about the apex of British class system and property owners wanting to maintain their ideological and physical hegemony, their position and incomes. Like I said, obviously it's not all about Brexit. Like Brexit is a major factor in the downfall of UK farming, but it's not the core factor here. As far as this, again, I think it misses the point to focus purely on how much money these people own and we need to focus on food security as the top priority because that's the
mm,
reason why the tax relief for farmers exists in the first place. It's in order to make sure that those farmers stay functional so that you still have people working and making our food and getting the food into the supermarkets. That has to be the priority. So if you do charge an inheritance tax and you do start to see those farms being sold, the government has to be making sure that those farms are going to places that are actually going to farm the land because
yeah.
otherwise you are causing a major catastrophe for the UK cost of living crisis if we damage like half of the food that we eat is made here. We
Hmm.
cannot afford to mess with that significantly.
Yeah. For sure. I think. Well, I mean, I was gonna say before we continue, I thought we could check in with the chat, but you've got us started. Um, I think no, you're completely right. I do think there's also an element. We had people talk about food prices the other day, but people were saying, well, it's kind of like how landlords will go for, oh, I'm going to use oh, well, we're going to have to put up our rates because we're being charged more. And that seems to be an excuse that's used a lot across food price, any kind of inflation, really, right? It's like, oh, well, the supplies got more expensive, so we're just going to have to keep throwing up the prices. If only there was a way for us to not allow people to do
Mm.
that. Let's have a look at the comments. We got Jacqueline saying, we've gone from politicians cosplaying as soldiers to politicians cosplaying as farmers. What next, I wonder? Politicians cosplaying as firefighters. I'm sure Nigel Farage has done a firefighting one. He's got
That's
to have
not a
been.
calendar I want.
That's not a Oh, they should try cosplaying human beings. Very true, Double D. Thank you very much. Completely agree. Um, Farmers should be tenants of the public community owned asset that is land. I do think it's weird how in the UK a lot of our rules around things like farmland go all the way back to like almost like feudal times in terms of how people have maintained this property in the first place. It's
Mm.
very weird thinking about like the landed gentry going to a protest and being like, we the people demand change. Um, it's a strange idea overall. God forbid the youth feed themselves with. Oh, this is back to the sandwich conversation, I believe. Thank you, Faith. Um, we're in the sandwich phase. We're in the sandwich section of the comments. Thank you, Jim. Cheese is swept. Jim does have some bangers that comes out on this. I like fancy chicken filling salad, European cheeses, ham and mustard sarnies too, but then I do swing both ways. Thank you, Edward. Just before we go on to that, what is your favourite sandwich filling?
Ooh, so if we're having it with cheese, it'll be Emmental every time. Because
Typical,
unfortunately, having lived in France, I can't not like anything
typical
but Emmental.
continental.
But I also do like, and you're going to hate me for this, jam and ham. Those are the sandwiches that I tend to have. It's really kind of nice,
No, I
but
do, I do. No, I see it,
mm,
but with brie or something.
that could make it better. Like,
Just ham
oh,
and jam alone is crazy.
ham and jam alone, yeah, I've had it since I was a kid. Like ideally, it would be Milky Bar spread, but they stopped making that in 1997, so um, I have to weep over that.
So that didn't come up on the FSM in the chat. It said, "Who cares about sandwiches?" FSM, how dare you? You're not interested in what's happening to our wonderful British cheese. My favourite sandwich, everyone, is English mild cheddar and English mustard.
Okay, so you
So
like mustard. Okay, so wait, does that make you a boomer?
no, it's fucking rancid. I don't know why anyone would ever eat English mustard. I always have. I'd always go for Romanian mustard is very good. English mustard tastes like poison. That's why people have to keep it in those little containers. Let's go on to the next questions in the chat. If only we had a way of making energy companies lower their prices, like a price cap or something.
Mm.
Yeah, I did. I remember when I first started learning about the energy price cap, and I was like, "But it's a cap, right? Why do we? Why isn't it capping it? Like the whole point is that it's like the top tier is that's the most, and they just kept raising it and raising it. I was like, why even have it
Mm.
if it's going to keep going up in the first place? And it is incredibly frustrating to see people like Derek Licorice, with cartoon name, who was speaking about, oh, it's terrible. Our customers are asking for help. They're saying they can't afford their bills at the same time as posting like massive profits. Um,
Yeah, right now I'm currently uncomfortably cold, and my provider is Utilita.
is
Um,
it?
yeah, and as you said, 3.1 million in profits. I feel
Thanks,
great.
Derek. Yeah. But Derek has said that he's concerned for you, so don't worry.
Oh,
He's
I
very
feel
concerned.
I feel warmer already.
The real energy was the friends you made along the way. Fantastic. Do we have? I think we had a couple more comments to go through. Just on, I think we've turned the chat into an absolute mess here. I do want to take a second now as well to just say thank you very much all for joining. I really appreciate you all being here. We need a secure energy infrastructure. A variety of different energy generation methods focused on the renewable power this nation is geographically ideal for, namely offshore wind. We are sixth best in the world for wind power as a country. The big issue that we have is how to actually get all of the energy from place to place in terms of the grid. That's
Mm.
why there's the whole NESO initiative that's been launched with NESO. Don't want to get it wrong. Yeah, from Labour, which is basically looking at the energy grid and trying to figure out how we get all the energy from point A to point B. And there are practical issues, but one example that I don't understand why the Labour Party wouldn't speak about is if we actually get to a point where 98% of the energy that we're using is coming from renewables, which is very possible based on our energy targets and the planning that we've got, that would save the average household £300 a month on their £300 a year on their electric bills, and that would be by 2030. So there's like tangible things that could happen and positives to look for, but instead I don't know, it's just the prices they're going up. Um,
Mm.
Okay, perfect. So I don't think we have any more in terms of the farms as well. I am going to very quickly go to a quick plug whilst everybody's watching. Thank you very much to everybody who has joined us tonight. I think we've got a pretty big viewer base from here, which is also very much thank you for Femi for joining us. Um, Again, just a reminder, Turn Left is completely voluntary. Everything we do is voluntary. We're doing it because we care about what we're talking about, and we do think that it's really important to have a left wing perspective and a left wing bias in some respects compared to what we're seeing in the mainstream media, which we'll go into the next topic that we're talking about. If you do want to support us, you can become a channel member. You can gift channel memberships, which a couple of people have done today. You can also support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 a month, or you can make a one-off donation. I believe you can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support, or you can, I think, click the link in our description to find out other ways to support. If you're not able to do it financially, we completely understand. If you're able to share this live, if you're able to comment and engage, or even after the live is finished and you've got the replay, just leaving a comment for the algorithm, anything and everything is appreciated. We, I am being told by my producer to send you over to Patreon if you're able to do that. But yes, we appreciate you all joining us, and it's very, very nice to have you. Let's jump into our final story. We need to talk a little bit about the mainstream media and the narratives that are being pushed at the moment. Why are we seeing what we're seeing? Um, Femi, it feels to me like the fact that farmers' inheritance tax and like the statuses of private schools and their tax exemptions being treated as like these existential societal threats by the media is weird.
Mm-hmm.
It seems, especially when we're talking about how much we need to be like connecting with real people and how the left are completely out of touch. What we're seeing from like the Times, the Independent, the Daily Mail, like, all of these right wing papers and the BBC is we need to be caring about these millionaire farmers and these private schools and their VAT.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that I made in my debate today. That there are 4.3 million children in poverty in the UK right now. Right now.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, the discussion that's happening right now on the mainstream media is exactly what kind of millionaires the kids of farmers get to be. And that affects what there are 100,000 farmers in the UK. So
Yeah.
that's the priority. It's genuinely insane. And yet, supposedly, again, the champions of the working people are focused mainly on what kind of millionaires farmers' kids get to be, not the 4.3 million kids who are in poverty.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's this whole thing. I think especially what I'm very aware of at the moment is that we're post two big elections, right? We've had obviously the US election has been pretty ground shaking, and it's turned into all of this discourse about how do we. People on the left are saying, how do we keep people left? How do we attract people to the left? People on the right are saying, how do we keep away the far right? And it's all about anyone who's not far right isn't appealing to working people, isn't appealing to normal working class, everyday, hardworking, normal local people. Um, but this narrative, and they're also using that narrative at the moment, it would seem, to say that the way that you appeal to those people is by just essentially sacking off minoritized groups at a time where it feels like they're absolutely the most at risk. It's Trans Day of Remembrance today. Um, we've also had like football events being protested, like young people's football events being protested because of trans kids being allowed to basically just be involved in sports. We've got the first ever trans lawmaker in the US has immediately been faced with their own sort of representatives trying to push a bill that would ban them from being able to use their bathroom of choice. Um, it's a time where there's like people of color, like global majority people, the trans community are all feeling very heavily under threat. We're being told that the best thing to do is not talk about those issues. I am going to save. I'm not going to go too far into it because I know that Curtis is planning on speaking on this on Friday about the Novara media situation with Michael Walker. But it appears that when we're talking about appealing to the working classes, what that really means is just sack those people off. But then what are the right doing that correctly by talking about millionaire farmers taxes and private schools? I don't understand where I don't, it feels a bit disingenuous.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to not to go into it, but I'm seeing Jim speak in the chat say Navarra refugees welcome here. Um,
You are, all of you, we love you.
um, yeah, it is incredible to see, especially because we have an advantage here in the UK, in the sense that we've seen the agenda of the far right play out over the last 8 years. Like,
Hmm.
if you think, I'm sorry, obviously, I'm going to keep mentioning Brexit because it's the biggest policy issue, current single policy affecting the UK economy. The people like Nigel Farage, people like Boris Johnson, that entire wing of politics, if you look at what have they spent their time doing over the last 8 years, it is Brexit. Like,
Hmm.
if you found out that in the 8 years before 9/11, uh, uh, what's his name, Osama bin Laden had been investing in Oreos cookies, you'd have a look at what was in the ingredients of those biscuits before you had them. We've seen what the far right spent the last 8 years doing. It was Brexit. That's their agenda, and now the majority of the people can see that it has made them poor. So we're not
Hmm.
like America with Trump. We're not like the Netherlands with Geert van Wilders.
uh, I
uh,
couldn't have helped you.
um, Geert Wilders, that's the one.
Got it.
Um, uh, because we've already seen it play out. So we have that advantage. And so
Mm,
we don't. And so even if you were trying to do that sort of crude, I will do whatever in politics is necessary in order to win the next election, it doesn't make sense because you don't have to. We can
yeah.
already just say, no, no, no. Like, you've got Nigel Farage saying that Brexit has made us poorer. Like,
Hmm.
you've got Boris Johnson saying that it's damaged our trade. Kemi Badenoch saying it's been traumatic for the car industry. We don't actually have to do this. All the narratives that the right love to use in terms of we're the ones that actually care about working class people, while the left goes off and deals with identity politics. It doesn't work in the UK, or at least it shouldn't if we had
Yeah.
decent communicators on the left.
Yeah. I think that actually ties in. There was a comment in the chat that I'm going to show up, which is from Young Sins, which says, like, why didn't Labour comms communicate the reality of the farmers' tax better? Like, what's wrong with their comms?
Mm,
And I think something that I'm trying to reckon with at the moment is, I mean, I've reckoned with it in terms of the Labour Party. The Labour Party isn't left. It's not left. It's centre right at best. They do not, if they wanted to come out and tangibly and change people's lives and tangibly improve people's lives, or if they wanted to tax the mega rich in a way, like, this is their most, that's the most they can bring themselves to do, is to cap inheritance tax at 1 million or 3 million if you're a married couple. If they actually did those things, they wouldn't have the support that they've got, because all of their support comes from, like, private funding at this point. I think it's a big question that we have to ask, especially when we see people like Michael Walker taking this opportunity to go, oh, well, actually, maybe transphobes have a point. And maybe we should reckon with the fact that transphobes have a point, especially on a topic when, like, at the topic of trans women in sports, which is not something that has a good point. It's a very easily shut down talking point. We know that there's no tangible research or demonstration of that having any impact, because it's not something that is like a cut and dry situation. It does, I have to start thinking about, I know that the Labour Party might be purposefully inadequate at different points, because they're choosing not to be what they kind of profess to be in that sense. Like, it's not a failure of capacity or capability. But when it comes to seeing major supposedly leftist commentators just seemingly jumping at the opportunity to throw trans people under the bus, I don't know. I'm now at the point where I'm like, is that someone who's misguided and has just got confused about what they're supposed to stand for, or is that someone who just didn't care in the first place, who enjoyed the attention of presenting themselves as this alternative?
yeah. Uh, it reminds me of when Eddie Dempsey, so the
Yeah.
head of RMT, threatened to sue me because in 2000, I think it was 2016, he was on the, I think it was Left for Leave or Labor for Leave, or some, he was on some sort of platform
Hmm.
talking about how um, Tom, whatever you might think of the Tommy Robinson supporters, whatever bigotry or whatever they got, they are they one thing that they've got right is that they hate liberals. They hate liberals, and they are right to hate them, because liberals think that they've got this coalition of upper middle class and ethnic minorities, and that's all they need to win the election, and they've forgotten the working class people of this country. Now, A, um, why are you saying that Tommy Robinson supporters are right? B, why are you implying that there is a coalition with, on one side, ethnic minorities, and on the other side, working class people, as if ethnic minority people aren't statistically more likely to be working class, which is just taking on the right wing
That exact
narratives.
narrative, yeah.
Exactly. Um, and he threatened to sue me because I said, like you're saying, Tommy Robinson's right. Why are you doing this? Like, even if I was from the tradition on the left that supported Brexit, I would be doing everything in my power to distance myself from the Tommy Robinson lot, and that I'm not like them. But he chose to go that direction, and seeing people who are on the left take that similar narrative right now, it means you don't care. It
Hmm.
means that you your priorities are kind of lost. And as I said, we don't need to do that, even from a strategic standpoint, because we have all the evidence we need to prove that these people are not the friends of the working class that they claim to be. But also, when I think about what can actually be done in order to move things forward, poverty is itself one of those intersectional issues. It cuts across all those things. Like,
Yeah.
all the protected characteristics that we talk about, poverty is the consequence of the discrimination that those groups face.
Hmm.
So if we take steps to address poverty, to a certain extent, a rising tide raises all ships. Like, when I talk about issues to do with race, I point out that if you've got a black sounding name, you have to send 80% more job applications to get a call back, which means that your ability to make money in the UK passes through a filter of racism. And that one of the ways you solve that is by things like anonymous CVs. So they don't see your
Hmm.
name, your gender, what
Yeah, yeah.
school you went to, what part of the country you're from. And that would address not just racial discrimination, it would address discrimination based on gender, discrimination
Mm-hmm.
based on class,
Yeah.
region. So there are ways that you can solve all these issues, and you don't have to, even again, from a purely amoral strategic standpoint, you don't have to go the way of trying to pit groups against each other in order to win the hearts of the right. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make any sense.
No, no, and it just that you also sometimes just don't need to say things. Like I think there's a big problem in people feeling like they're very comfortable, and I don't know if it is partly like um I don't know if it's that like white commentators feel that they have more of a kind of allegiance to like a proximity to speak on like trans rights because there's like a separate, it's almost like people kind of miss out the intersectionality between trans rights, people who are working class, trans people of color are the most victimized of any group, statistically, and people feel that they could go, well actually, the transphobes have a point here, and it's like I've never seen anybody right wing say, you know what, the left have a pretty good point on that thing. Like they haven't. They do it for
Yeah,
show sometimes. They'll say like, "Oh, it's a debate. I'm just asking questions," but it's not ever like the right are very good at having solidarity with each other and just backing up anything that anybody says. And I just want to say there are some comments in the chat where people have said like the left are eating the left because we're criticizing. Someone that I was talking to the other day was saying about in terms of criticizing Novara Media on Turn Left. Firstly, this is my opinion. Turn Left is five of us, and then also Femi doesn't have to stand by the Turn Left brand on that side either. But it's not eating someone or attacking someone to say that something they've said is shit.
mm-hmm.
Like, and that's like, I'm sorry, this whole kind of fragility of it, of like, oh, well, you can't criticize someone for saying something. I'm going to do it. You can't say anything anymore. You can't say that's transphobic because then that's attacking people, apparently. And then that means that everybody, no wonder people become racist and right wing. Like, you've been slightly mean to someone or you've criticized someone, which means that now we're all going to abandon all of our morals that we pretended to have. Like, if you're actually committed to these things, if you're intersectional, if you're anti-capitalist, you don't drop all of that because any group say to you, "I don't like what you said here." Like
Yeah,
that's the type of fragility that I don't think is helpful to the left. Not actually just calling people out and having a conversation. I don't really
yeah.
think there's an issue in that side.
Not to mention, like, within reason, if you're playing a football match and you lose because your own goalkeeper keeps booting the ball into his own net, you can shout at the other team all you want, but until you deal with your own goalkeeper, you're not going to solve any problem. So if people on the left are doing things that weaken the entire movement, then we have to address
Mm-hmm.
those issues. Not to mention, like, on a global standpoint, like when you look at what's happening in America with Kamala, the argument that she needed to be more Trumpy, more dog whistly, more right wing in order to win, and that would have done it because she wasn't speaking to ordinary people. I
I
think.
mean, what do you want people to parody it? I mean, there's a really, I'm gonna not trying to be too crazy with this, but just pulling up one comment that we've got in here from Martin, who I do often agree with Martin. But Martin said here in terms of this, Eddie wasn't saying Tommy Robinson's supporters were right in their racism. He was pointing out how the liberal ruling class has historically betrayed the working class. When we talk about, I think this is the thing that frustrates me when we talk about the liberal classes versus the working classes and people who support Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson is like supported by the likes of Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage is in the ruling class. He's in the ruling class. Rees-Mogg is in the ruling class. All of the incredibly wealthy Brexit billionaires are in the ruling class. And they are literally dressing up as a cartoon of what they think working class people are, getting in a tractor and going down Whitehall. And that's supposedly relatable. That makes people go, oh great, no, they are on our side. They are on our side after all. As a way to, and literally robbing people in the working class at the exact same time. So this, that talking about the liberal ruling classes versus the people who support Tommy Robinson and not his ilk, but like GB News is funded by fucking billionaires. They're not working class people representing each other. So this kind of hypocrisy of like the ruling elites, like Keir Starmer, Nigel Farage, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, in my mind, are all in the same group. There's them, and then there's literally everybody else. We don't really have a middle class in this country anymore. The top 50, the richest 50 families have more money than the bottom 50% of the country. And we're talking about like whether or not the working classes are being listened to. Like, everybody is in this position right now. I just find it a very like a frustrating false equivalence that we seem to see, or false dichotomy, whichever way around it's supposed to be.
Not to mention, he's saying that I'm misrepresenting what Eddie Dempsey said. Eddie Dempsey said that Tommy Robinson's supporters were right. He didn't say they were right about the racism. He said they were right about Labour's focus on ethnic minorities to the expense of what he called working class people. That is deliberately pitting ethnic minority people against working class people, which is the whole narrative you hear from people like Nigel Farage. So I said, if I was in his position, I'd be doing everything in my power to try and distance myself from people like Tommy Robinson, even though we both supposedly wanted Brexit. But he chose to go the exact opposite way. So as a black person, I do not feel comfortable when political leaders start praising Tommy Robinson's supporters. That's my personal feeling.
Well,
Now
well
going
they've
back,
got a point.
yeah.
It's valid concern.
And going back to the issue of Kamala and whether or not she had to go, whether or not she should have gone more to the right, I honestly think that the Democrats were almost doomed to a sense, because the problem we're seeing across the West is you get these more centrist, borderline center-left parties that try and run elections against the right. And the problem is that they never do enough to actually improve the lives of working class people across the country, because they have to try and stay in the center and never really address the underlying inequalities that leave so many people in poverty. And so they never go far enough. And so the right says, we'll do it.
Yeah,
We're the one. If they're not helping you, you've seen them not help you. We're going to help you. And so this constant efforts to copy the right is never going to work. You're just never going to do what you need to do.
But I think this is the thing that's the most frustrating, is that we, like you were saying earlier, we've had proof of concept that what the right does doesn't work. We had 14 years of a Tory government. We had Brexit. Every single one of those things has made our lives worse. And the output still seems to be, well, maybe we should just be doing it harder. Maybe we should just get more migrants gone. Maybe we should just get more Brexit done. Like,
Yeah.
I think that just to wrap it, just to bring us around, because I know that we are a little bit over time. I think there's a funny comment here from Young Sins, who has said, leftists are more interested in becoming career grifters rather than staying committed to their values after the Corbyn outing. I do think I will. So here's the way that I'll frame this: is I think leftists for sure, because it's really, really hard to make any money as an actual leftist grifter, as an attempted grifter. Myself, I would love to be a leftist grifter. I don't get any fucking money. TikTok keeps banning me and stopping me from allowing me to make comments or comment anything to do with Israel or Palestine. Femi, I'm sure you know, being a left wing grifter is pretty fucking tough.
Oh no, we used to joke in the Our Future Our Choice office about how much easier it would be to just be on the Brexit side. We'd get so much money, we could just lie. Our lives would be easier, so much easier.
Just get that Brexit cash and say that you hate women, and it's all fine.
Exactly.
Like, there are genuine lobbying groups that are looking for influencers to get on side and talk about transphobic shit, and I wouldn't be shocked, because it's really hard to stay aligned to your values when your values don't align with capitalism. Like, it's really, really difficult, because it means that you don't appeal to any of the commercial interests of a lot of different people. Are there any other kind of final elements that you'd like to bring into this, just as we start to kind of wrap up?
I have to mention that again, because I haven't mentioned it a lot because I'm still working on my big labor analysis video, but we have to be talking about proportional representation. Like it's dropped off the radar because we're no longer in election mode. But I will be screaming about that come January, and I won't stop until the next election, because everybody has seen what has happened. We've all seen that Labour come to power with the Tories. We've all seen Labour come to power with 34% of the vote and get 62% of the seats. We know that they owe us their position in power, and we should have more progressive MPs, but we don't, because of first past the post. So unless we fix that, if you're not happy with this constant binary between the Tories and Labour, and neither of them improving people's quality of life, and because everybody gets disillusioned with them, the risk that Nigel Farage then walks into Parliament at the next election, we have to address the voting system.
I agree. I'm excited to see you go full steam on this as well.
Oh, it'll be fun. because
Well,
it is literally the case that the Labour Party has voted to have proportional representation. So the Labour Party wants a real democracy right now, because on almost every election, the majority of votes don't actually have any effect, because a party with a minority of the votes gets majority control in Parliament, which means the majority of votes don't count, which means that Keir Starmer is the sole thing stopping us having a real democracy. And so I want a situation where he can't get through a single interview without somebody asking him, so, Sir Starmer, why do you believe the majority of British votes shouldn't count? I want that every time he goes on TV.
And then, okay, well, if you do that, and then I'll jump out behind and be like, what about those safe routes?
Yeah.
If we do that, this is why they don't let us on. This is why it's really difficult to be a left-wing grifter, because they won't let you do that.
Exactly.
But I am very, very excited about that. Thank you so much, Femi. I appreciate you coming on with us tonight. It's
Thanks for
been
having me.
really, really good to talk and cathartic.
Yes.
I
And
don't
thank
know
you
if
for
I feel
teaching me about energy
tangibly.
bills.
You are so welcome. See, I'm full of exciting tidbits. Thank you, Femi. And just to kind of wrap things up, everybody, I really, really appreciate you all joining. I appreciate all of the different conversations in the chat. Like I was saying, I think this fear of being attacked or criticized is silly. And on the left, we need to be able to have loads of different conversations. There's always some absolutely crazy discourse happening in the chat when we do these shows. I really appreciate all different perspectives on that. And I hope that we feel a little bit kind of reassured that we're not going crazy here. We feel a little bit validated that there is some sort of commitment to the same cause across the board. You can find myself and Femi over on TikTok. We are also on Blue Sky. I believe we're also on Instagram. I think Femi is still on Twitter. But I think also Turn Left Art. So you can find us on any of those platforms. If you enjoyed this live show, please do go ahead and support Turn Left. Subscribe, notify, set up your little notifications. I think we are live 4 nights a week. Most weeks, we're definitely live 4 nights a week. We do Monday, Wednesday, and Friday shows. And then we also have the debrief on Sunday, which is a little bit more of like a panel discussion, a lot more kind of interaction with the chat, talking about some of the big topics. Remember, there is a lot of news happening, and it's happening all the time. If you want us to cover it, you can help us grow the platform. You can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 a month, or you can make a one-off donation over at coffee.com/turn left. I have been Sneakrit. It's been lovely to see you all today, and we will see you soon. Bye.
Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.